Hi guys, so a few things. Firstly, just a general shout out to you all, and a thank you for watching and supporting me. Linked to this, I've had lots of things going on in my personal life recently, so if I take a bit of time responding to comments, I apologise, and I'll try to get back on track with that soon. As to this case, this is again about the death of a child. After this one, I'll move away from these types of videos for a bit, as they're emotionally draining, but as this was recently in court, I wanted to cover it. Lastly, there's brief mention of animal abuse in the third section where I talk about the attack itself. I've put a warning on the screen when I'm about to speak about it and chapters around it, so please skip ahead if you need to. Anyway, on with the video. At around 6:50 AM on Tuesday the 30th of April 2024, the early morning silence of the streets of Hainault in East London was broken by the sounds of screaming and shouting. A man had driven his van into a pedestrian before crashing into a house. This was no accident. The man behind the wheel, 36-year-old Marcus Monzo, was on a mission to kill. He had spent the last decade in a drug-fueled haze, obsessed with conspiracy theories and weapons. After attempting to murder one man, Monzo then spent the next 20 minutes hacking and slashing at multiple people with a samurai sword, including pedestrians, 2 police officers, and a couple in their own home. He also attacked an innocent 14-year-old called Daniel Anjorin, who was almost decapitated and left dying in the middle of the street. This is a truly horrific case, a study of the unhinged mind of a monster. Welcome to Evil Among Us. Marcus Monzo was born on Monday the 11th of April 1988 in a small village in the municipality of Astora in southern Brazil. He had at least one sibling that we know about, a brother called Eduardo, and it's reported he grew up in a very rural area and would spend most of his childhood wandering around the countryside and riding horses. Eduardo has reported that their mother ran a clothing business and the family had a comfortable life. Both Monzo and Eduardo went to university in Brazil to study business administration and set up an online clothing company which was mildly successful. When Monzo was in his early 20s, the family moved to New Hampshire in the US. Monzo and Eduardo were able to adapt as both had learnt English at school, but it's reported that neither was legally allowed to work in the US. So after a few years, in 2013, Marcus Monzo, aged 25, moved to London to find a job and to establish a life for himself. He initially found work in a pub and seemed to be thriving in the UK. Eduardo later reported, quote, "We were a happy family, and Marcus would work, meet with friends, and enjoy the occasional social drink. He was a healthy, popular guy. He had no problems." However, over the space of around 8 years, Marcus Monzo would disconnect entirely from reality and descend into drug-fueled madness, living in a fantasy world of conspiracy theories, coupled with a fixation with weapons, which would result in him becoming an extremely dangerous man, who in 20 minutes went on a rampage, which resulted in the murder of a 14-year-old boy who was simply walking to school. This is a complicated case, and in order to understand what comes next, especially the arguments made in court, I need to explain an underlying feature of Marcus Monzo, and that is that he appears to suffer from something called schizotypal personality disorder, or SPD for short. I'll try to explain this briefly, but as fully as I can, as it's really important. Apologies to any clinicians listening. I know I'm missing out certain things, but this is a whistle-stop tour of this condition. So SPD, like other personality disorders, is a long-term mental health condition where someone's thinking and behaviour differs significantly from the norm. So there are various symptoms of SPD, but the ones relevant to this case are that those who suffer from this condition often have strange or unusual thinking, beliefs or mannerisms, and believe in special powers such as mental telepathy or superstitions. These individuals are very prone to believing in often contradictory conspiracy theories that are sometimes considered weird by those around them. There's a fine line between SPD and schizophrenia. The main difference is psychosis, i.e. a complete break from reality, which is often characterised by things like hearing voices or having completely unhinged beliefs. Psychosis is not a common feature of SPD. However, if you add in excessive drug use, then these people are more likely than the average Joe to become psychotic. As I've said on a number of occasions, drugs magnify and exacerbate pre-existing underlying issues. So, for example, if you generally believe the government is lying to you, which is the basis of a lot of conspiracy theories, then add mind-altering substances to the mix, you may end up believing that you're being followed in the streets by agents of the state, or they're reading your mind, or watching you through the TV, etc. In this psychotic state, the person can be unpredictable, sometimes violent, whilst acting on their delusions. So essentially, people with schizotypal personality disorder generally believe in very strange things, and they should avoid drugs, as this can make them far worse. This isn't the only factor in this case, and I'll point out the others as we go along, but this mental health angle is pivotal to highlight for what comes next. So did Marcus Monzo avoid drugs? Did he bollocks? He essentially spent almost a decade in a drug-fueled haze. Monzo practiced martial arts, but in 2016 due to an injury, he could no longer train, and began practicing yoga and searching for online gurus, initially to improve his technique, but he soon became obsessed with spirituality. At the same time, he was beginning to experiment with more and more drugs, including cannabis, LSD, and magic mushrooms. Monzo likely thought that he was becoming more spiritual, more enlightened, but all this did was opened up his mind to every kook and conspiracy theory out there. He went to a spiritual retreat in India, and when he came back, he was far more arrogant, swanning around as though he knew everything, and his use of drugs increased, apparently to achieve spiritual enlightenment, when in reality he was just scrambling his brain. In 2021, Marcus Monzo travelled to northern Brazil for another spiritual retreat, which involved staying with indigenous Amazonian tribes. Whilst there, he drank copious quantities of ayahuasca, also known as yage, which is a brew with powerful hallucinogenic qualities. Monzo was apparently able to smuggle this back to the UK, where it's illegal, and drank this daily, on top of all the other drugs he was taking. Monzo then began following some truly deranged beliefs and travelled to alternative festivals around the world. This included Breatharian events in Italy and Denmark. Breatharianism is a deranged belief system that humans do not need to eat and can simply survive on their life force. Many people who have followed this practice have starved to death. Whilst Marcus Monzo would frequently be at these bizarre gatherings, he was apparently despised. He was arrogant, cocky, and talked down to people. He would interject himself into conversations, trying to act as some sort of guru. One person who knew him later stated, quote, "He has become more extreme over the past couple of years, talking about being a spiritual guide and a guru, and even a god. He was using spirituality as a cover for his narcissism." The more drugs Marcus Monzo used, the more unstable he became, and the more bizarre the conspiracy theories he subscribed to, and his Twitter feed between around April 2023 and his crimes a year later were just a barrage of increasingly deranged ramblings. The sheer number of conspiracy theories that Marcus Monzo subscribed to is just staggering, and included, although this is not a complete list, believing the earth was flat and was controlled by the Jews, believing in chemtrails, i.e. that aircrafts were spraying chemicals into the air to reduce the population. He also said that thoughts were actually controlled by ancient AI. He claimed 9/11 was an inside job. He believed in satanic cabals. He believed the Pope was secretly a lizard. He stated that Elon Musk and Hillary Clinton had been replaced by Illuminati replicas. He also subscribed to urine therapy, essentially showering and drinking his own waste, which he said he did on a daily basis. Marcus Monzo also reached out to Andrew Tate, praising him for his rhetoric, as well as defending Hitler. Essentially, any conspiracy theory you can think of, Monzo was there supporting it. His ramblings demonstrate he was clearly losing touch with reality. This was also demonstrated by how he described himself online. On his TikTok profile, he stated that he was a, quote, mystic, musician, martial artist, Jedi, and a ninja. With regards to the last description, Monzo would repeatedly post pictures of samurais and ninjas online. As time went on, Marcus Monzo completely cut himself off from friends and family. The only people he was interacting with were those who reinforced his delusional beliefs. This could have all potentially been benign. Marcus Monzo could have simply been one of many mentally ill men screaming into the ether online, never really troubling anyone. But there was another element to his personality, his fixation with weapons, and something we'll come back to later, his love of violence. If he was going to be a ninja or a samurai, he needed the appropriate weaponry, and he spent hundreds of pounds ordering razor-sharp samurai swords online. Police later recovered this video of Monzo displaying one of these swords on the 4th of April 2024. He's clearly giddy with excitement. Also in the video is his cat called Wizard, who unfortunately would suffer an awful fate.
Ooh. Freaking sexy. Ah, this is real leather. Ah, ha! Segura! Ooh. Ooh. Oh my God. Whoa. Sharing. I'm sharing here. Just sharing my sword. Wow. Wow.
I'll return to a fuller profile later, but it's important to summarise what we're dealing with here. A man whose connection with reality was always tenuous at best, who had spent almost a decade subscribing to every deranged conspiracy theory and practice he could find, all whilst he was taking copious amounts of powerful drugs, pushing him further and further into the realms of delusion. A man who clearly had a god complex that was narcissistic. Only he knew the truth, only he was enlightened, and he saw himself as an assassin, a samurai, an executioner, and he had the tools he needed to mete out justice. This man was a ticking time bomb, and less than a month after posting this video, Marcus Monzo would go on a rampage which would shock the country and result in the murder of an innocent 14-year-old child. Just to reiterate the warning from the beginning of the video, I'll mention animal abuse briefly in this section. I'll chapter around it. Please skip past this bit if you need to. But first, we need to talk about Daniel Anjorin, the young man who lost his life in this terrible tragedy. He was born in 2009, lived with his parents Grace Anjorin and Dr. Ebenezer Anjorin, as well as his two siblings, in a house in Hainault, a suburb in East London. This is a nice leafy area, a far cry from the hustle and bustle of inner London, and is considered a safe place to raise a family. Daniel had a very bright future ahead of him. He attended Bancroft School, a prestigious private school in Woodford Green, with many of its pupils eventually progressing to studying at Oxford and Cambridge. Tragically, at the time of Daniel's murder, this school had only recently come to terms with the death of another former pupil called Grace O'Malley Kamar, who was just 19 years old when she, along with two other people, was stabbed to death at random by a paranoid schizophrenic called Valdo Calacane on Friday the 16th of June 2023 in Nottingham. The parallels between the deaths of both Grace and Daniel were truly frightening. I'll return to paying tribute to Daniel later in this video, but it's important at this point to understand how important he was to those around him. and how much he had to offer the world. His father Ebenezer said the following in court, quote, "What was Daniel like? I cannot even begin to describe the pain and anguish that we as a family feel about the loss of Daniel. Daniel was a much-loved son and brother to 2 siblings. All 3 siblings had a close relationship with each other. There was an age gap of only 4 years between all 3 of them. As a family, we had made sacrifices to ensure that Daniel and his siblings had a good education and went to good schools. Daniel was very gifted academically. Daniel also enjoyed sport and playing football, rugby, hockey and cricket. He also enjoyed playing the violin and piano, and had reached grade 6 in violin and grade 5 in piano. He enjoyed school and had a good circle of friends. In February 2024, he had even been selected with a small number of other students from his school to attend an educational excursion to Cambridge University to find out more about the university and the Cambridge University application process. Bancroft School later released a statement calling Daniel a, quote, "true scholar and someone who had a positive nature and gentle character." Daniel woke up on Tuesday the 30th of April 2024 and got ready for another day at school. This was, to him, as it should have been, like any other day, but he had no idea that he would be attacked by a maniac, almost on his own doorstep, who he'd never met, who never uttered a word to him, but who would rob him of the bright future that was clearly ahead of him. Whilst Daniel was likely still sleeping, his killer Marcus Monzo was in his property in Newham, preparing for his rampage. He had been smoking massive amounts of cannabis for days by this point, and was completely untethered from reality, i.e. he was psychotic. It needs to be said that Monzo was unlikely to simply be smoking regular old bud. I imagine he was using super strength skunk, and as to how much he was actually taking, this hasn't been reported, but it's likely to have been enough that a regular person would have been rendered completely unable to function, but Monzo's tolerance was inevitably through the roof. I cannot believe this was the first time that Monzo had been in this state, potentially not the first time he'd been violent, but what he did next would make national headlines due to the sheer brutality of his actions. We will speculate on Monzo's mindset later, but what we do know is that he convinced himself that his cat wizard was controlling his mind, and so he strangled his pet, skinned him, deboned the corpse, and placed it on a baking tray, apparently with the intention of cooking and eating it. However, Monzo had apparently also convinced himself that there was a pending apocalypse, so he had no time for his meal, so he put the baking tray with the remains of his pet in his van, along with swords, a kitchen knife, and a BB gun, before setting off. He then drove approximately 11 miles north from his home to Hainault. Why he decided on this part of London is currently unknown. At 6:51 am, Monzo drove down Lane Close and spotted Donato Awule, who was walking to work. Monzo turned the wheel and drove straight into Donato, catapulting him into the front garden of a nearby house, whilst the car itself careened into the property. Donato was not seriously injured and got to his feet, and he saw Marcus Monzo climb out of the driver's seat, armed with a samurai sword. Here is Donato describing what happened, including the moment he was slashed with the sword.
I saw this guy and he just randomly hit me with a van, but I kind of saved myself. I didn't panic straight away, so I kind of tried to predict at least 20%, but even so, if he still got me with the van, I survived. Then I was on the floor for a couple seconds or a minute. I don't really know how many, the time frame I was down. So I just wake up, I was like, you know what, it's not today. I had myself, I was like, it's not today. My survival skills kick in. So I saw this guy, like, I went to him, I said, are you okay? He didn't talk to me, he was angry. I said, yeah, I need to kill. I was like, huh? Who are you killing? And like, hello, obviously. And I said to him, you okay? Then the next thing I saw a samurai sword. And just early in the morning, bear in mind, he just got hit by a van. I'm seeing Barry. And then, bear in mind, I use glasses as well, so my glasses are somewhere else. I was like, hold on, let me just concentrate and look what I'm saying. And I say samurai sword, and I just pull it out. I was like, okay. And I did 2 steps back. I was like, what are you doing? Hello? And he was like, oh, I'm gonna kill you, yeah. I was like, okay, this guy is not playing at all. So I start swinging my knife like that. Then I start stepping back. I fell off, get up again. And he came again. And that's when I turned my eye to see where I am, in case we don't know whether they're in 2 or in 3, but it was only 1 so far, thank God for that. So I look at my back for a slip of a second. I saw with my corner of my eye that he's trying to swing. So I kind of moved back, and this way he caught me right in my neck. So when he caught me straight away, I panicked for, again, a couple of seconds. And I remember what my cousin used to tell me, because he's a doctor as well. And I said, Donato, I know your job, so if anything happened, this is what you need to do. And that kicked in my brain straight away. And I used my thumb, and I pushed my nerve. My major nerve was basically out. I put it right deep inside my side of the throat, and I put pressure. It just came out of a horror movie. What you basically see in the TV, that will just happen to you live and direct. So there's not any feeling that you can say, because, how can I say, you just escaped death.
Donato's quick thinking saved his life. Later, he was told by a paramedic that had he not stemmed the bleeding from his neck, he would have died. He was able to escape, and doorbell footage caught him screaming as he ran down the road. As Donato turned to run, he saw 14-year-old Daniel Anjorin, who had just moments before left his house, and he was walking down the road on his way to school. Donato shouted, trying to warn this child that he was in extreme danger, but Daniel was wearing his headphones and didn't hear him. Daniel never saw the man who ended his life. In court, Marcus Monzo was described as, quote, moving quickly like a predator, approaching Daniel at speed from behind. He then raised the sword and brought it down with all of his might onto Daniel's neck. Daniel fell to the floor immediately, with an injury which was later described as almost decapitating him. Whilst he was lying dying and completely defenceless on the floor, Monzo stabbed him in the chest, before dragging his body along the road a few feet by a school bag, before disappearing from sight. The horrific scene was filmed by an eyewitness.
He just killed that boy. He just killed him.
By this point, the police and an ambulance had been called, with the latter being the first to arrive at 7:02 a.m. However, they soon had to retreat from the immediate area, as Marcus Monzo emerged and began attacking the ambulance with the sword. Around a minute later, the first police car arrived on scene, quickly accompanied by a second, and the officers came face to face with Marcus Monzo, who was waving the sword around, screaming, quote, "Is there anybody here who believes in God?" Something he repeated throughout his rampage. All the officers had to get Monzo to back off was pava spray, similar to pepper spray.
Yellow jackpot. Move.
Mate, drop that now! Drop it! Drop it now! Drop it! Drop! Drop it now! Drop it! Drop the sword! Drop the sword! Like close, more units, more units! Drop it now!
Units line close, make control.
There's anybody here who believes in God?
Drop it!
Are there gods here?
Drop!
Are there gods or gods?
Drop it!
Drop it! Drop it!
Drop it now!
Monzo then bolted and was chased by the officers down an alleyway, with him turning and attacking Peter Yasmin Metchem Whitfield, with him bringing the sword down on her 3 times, hitting her head, shoulder and arm. She fell to the ground, blood pooling from her injuries. Marcus Monzo still swinging his sword around, then retraced his steps and walked back down Lane Close. He eventually found an unlocked back door and entered the home of a man called Henry Polania, who was in bed with his wife Cindy Arias. Their 4-year-old daughter was asleep in the next room. Henry and Cindy woke to a crazed maniac stood over them, armed with a samurai sword. Monzo leant back, raised the sword above his head, and was clearly aiming at the neck of Cindy. But Henry refused to let his wife be harmed, and he later reported, quote, "I was like, I can't let this happen. I pulled my hands towards the blades to stop him. I tried to push the blade, but I couldn't because it was too quick. How can I explain? It was like, that's it. I looked at my hand, and it was all open. You could see my bones. I was bleeding. At that moment, I thought, oh my God, this is not a bad dream. This is real life. He's going to kill us." So essentially, Henry caught the blade of the sword with his hand, inevitably saving his wife's life. He's a hero, one of several that day. The couple's daughter had woken up and came into their room crying, and this seemed to unnerve Monzo, who took 2 steps back and hesitated. He then pointed the end of the sword at the faces of Henry, Cindy, and their daughter, before saying, quote, "I'm just going to let you live because of your little one." He then left. This attack was over in a matter of minutes, and Marcus Monzo was then back on Lane Close, with the police following. He continued down the street and turned onto New North Road. The police's fear was that he was travelling towards Hainault tube station, where there would be multiple early morning commuters making their way to work he could target. However, Monzo didn't really seem to have any sort of plan, and he turned around and walked into Thurlow Gardens. He was eventually cornered by some garages and was approached by officers who again tried to subdue him with pava spray. One of the officers, Inspector Malloy Campbell, approached with his police baton out and raised it to try and disarm the attacker. Inspector Campbell later reported, quote, "He started closing down the distance quickly, slashing with his sword. He was slashing at me, and I was hitting him, and my baton hit his sword in midair. We clipped each other. He went across the top of my chest and cut off part of my body-worn camera. We then went back to each other and hit each other, and that was the point where the blade came across my arm, cutting my fleece and then nicking my hand on the way out." Inspector Campbell retreated injured, and Monzo scrambled over a garage and dropped down into the garden of a house in Franklin Gardens. He then began hopping fences until he emerged on Thurlow Gardens, where he was surrounded by officers armed with tasers, who eventually subdued the madman, and he was arrested at 7:15 a.m, approximately 20 minutes after the rampage began. Whilst the terror wrought by Marcus Monzo on the streets of East London had been brought to an end, the heartache in this case had only just begun. At almost exactly the same time that Monzo was arrested, Dr. Daniel Anjorin became aware that his son had been attacked. He later recalled, quote, "At approximately 7:15 a.m, I was informed by my eldest son that Daniel had been stabbed on the road near our house. I ran outside of the house, and just across the road I saw a hunched up body by the side on the road. I did not realise that it was Daniel at first, but as I got closer, I recognised the school sports clothes and saw his face. He was lying in a pool of blood and had a deep cut to his face, running from the side of his mouth to the back of his neck. He was motionless. I knew at once that he was dead, but I reached down, called his name, and held his head. After a few minutes I phoned his mother, who had left for work earlier and teaches in a local school, and I asked her to come back home. My eldest son, who had not yet left for school, was also with me. An ambulance arrived, and the ambulance crew and other paramedics who also arrived at the scene attempted to resuscitate Daniel for approximately 20 minutes. Daniel was in cardiac arrest and he was rushed to hospital where doctors and nurses fought to save his life. But at 8:48 a.m. on Tuesday the 30th of April 2024, 14-year-old Daniel Anjorin was pronounced dead. I said at the beginning of this video that I'm going to avoid these types of cases for a little while because they're so painful to cover. The idea of saying goodbye to your child as they walk out the door 1 minute and then less than 15 minutes later cradling them in your arms, seeing their horrific injuries, and then less than 2 hours later being told your child is dead just destroys me. Losing a child is every parent's worst nightmare, but this is something else. The horror, disgust and sheer heartache I feel when telling these stories is nothing compared to the pain the families go through. But despite this, as we'll see, Daniel's parents showed unbelievable courage and stoicism in the aftermath of this tragedy. As for the monster who robbed their son of his future, Marcus Monzo, he was taken into custody, still high and rambling on about God. He continued to make no sense and simply told the police that he had an alternative personality of a professional assassin, as well as likening his stabbing spree to the film The Hunger Games. There was no real question about who had committed these offences, and on Wednesday the 1st of May 2024, the day after the rampage, Marcus Monzo was charged with the murder of Daniel Anjorin. He would also be charged with the attempted murders of Donato Rule, PC Yasmin Metchan-Whitfield and Cindy Arias, as well as the wounding of Inspector Malloy Campbell and Henry Polania. There were also additional charges related to weapons. At his first hearing at Westminster Magistrates Court the next day, Monzo was flanked by prison officers and spoke only to confirm his name, with him standing with his hand placed across his chest. He was initially sent to Broadmoor High Security Hospital to receive treatment, and then eventually he was sent to prison on remand to await his appearance at the Old Bailey in London, where he would be held accountable for the horror he caused. On Friday the 2nd of May 2025, Marcus Monzo pleaded guilty to possession of 2 swords on the day of his rampage, but pleaded not guilty to possessing a kitchen knife which was found in his van. Importantly, he also pleaded not guilty to the murder of Daniel Anjorin and multiple serious offences linked to his stabbing spree that had occurred almost exactly a year before. His trial on these charges began on Tuesday the 3rd of June 2025. The strategies of the defence and the prosecution were laid out in their opening arguments, and there were some areas they agreed on. There was no doubt that Marcus Monzo was psychotic at the time of his crimes, i.e. he was completely disconnected from reality. Both also concurred that he suffered from an underlying mental health condition, i.e. schizotypal personality disorder, but the defence tried to suggest that because of this, and this alone, he became psychotic and went on a rampage. Therefore, he was not wholly responsible for his actions. They were clearly looking for a manslaughter conviction, which would result in a much lesser sentence. However, the prosecution countered. They called a psychiatrist, who stated that, as I've already outlined, psychosis is not a common feature of SPD, but that someone with this condition may experience this if they take a large quantity of drugs, including cannabis, and that this is what tipped Marcus Monzo over the edge. The psychiatrist concluded that had Monzo not been high as a kite on the date of this incident, it likely wouldn't have happened. He had put himself in this position, and therefore should be held responsible for the outcome. They also called witnesses, who testified to Marcus Monzo's deterioration over the years, and how he'd shown some insight and been told that his drug use was destroying him. So he knew the impact on him, but continued anyway. Monzo didn't give evidence, with him claiming he couldn't remember anything. I don't believe this is true, but even though he didn't say a word, I think how he carried himself did him no favours. He sat impassively during most of the proceedings. If you or I blacked out and came to and were told we'd done something horrific, we would likely be absolutely mortified, but Monzo simply didn't seem to care. I think this shows something different from his mental illness, something about him as a person, the fact that he's cold, callous, unfeeling, a true monster. Other information was disclosed which reinforced the perception that at his core, Marcus Monzo is an evil man. It was reported that whilst he was in Broadmoor Hospital receiving treatment, he'd spoken to staff about a slasher movie he'd watched, and whilst talking to them, he was gleefully making stabbing motions in the air. Also, when he was eventually sent to prison, he had regularly been using drugs, specifically spice, a synthetic form of cannabis. So again, if I blacked out and did something horrific and was told this was because of drugs, I would avoid them like the plague for the rest of my life, for fear of the same thing happening again. But in the case of Marcus Monzo, despite him having become psychotic due to drug use and killing a child during this time, with the potential that if he carried on using substances, he may become homicidal again, he simply carried on. I think this man simply doesn't care. He is, as I'll return back to later, a narcissist, someone who believes he can do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, and has no real remorse for his actions. Thankfully, the jury saw through the bullshit, and on Wednesday the 25th of June 2025, Marcus Monzo was found guilty of the attempted murders of Donato Awule, PC Yasmin Metchan-Whitfield, and Cindy Arias. He was also convicted of the wounding of Inspector Malloy Campbell and Henry Polania. Lastly, and most importantly, he was found guilty of the murder of 14-year-old Daniel Anjorin. Monzo was back at the Old Bailey on Friday the 27th of June 2025 before Mr Justice Benathan for sentencing. Before the sentence was passed, Daniel's father Ebenezer read out a victim impact statement on behalf of the family. He said, quote, "We will not see Daniel obtain his GCSEs, A-levels, or go to university. Daniel has so much potential to excel in so many areas. He could have been a great scientist, financer, or business founder. We will not see him get married or have children, all the normal things that parents hope for their children. All these hopes and aspirations have been cruelly snatched away from us through the wicked actions of Marcus Monzo. As a family, we have all had difficulty coming to terms with Daniel's loss. Daniel's grandparents have also lost a much-loved grandchild. Daniel brought great joy to them through his academic success, his kindness, and thoughtfulness. Daniel's death has brought great sorrow and sadness to their lives, and they miss him immensely. The cousins have lost a close family friend and playmate. Daniel's school friends have lost a dear friend. As parents, one of the most painful aspects of Daniel's murder is sometimes seeing the pain of Daniel's loss in our children's eyes, knowing that they are thinking of him and missing him. Justice Benathan then addressed Monzo, who sat impassively in the dock. The judge ran through Monzo's horrific crimes, which lasted just 20 minutes, but which would cost so many so much. The sentencing was structured in such a way that Marcus Monzo learned his fate related to some of the offences first, and then the judge passed the sentence for the most serious crime, the murder of Daniel Anjorin. Ultimately, this was the lead offence, and therefore, this sentence will ultimately dictate how long Monzo spent in prison. I played the last half of the hearing where all the sentences were passed. I'll chapter the part where the murder of Daniel is specifically talked about.
I have considered the Sentencing Council guideline for all the offences other than murder. For all these sentences, I will reduce the term that you would otherwise have received by 10% or slightly more to allow for your previous good character and the fact you were psychotic at the time of offending. Those offences will all be concurrent to the term of life imprisonment, but nonetheless I need to specify what each will be. For these counts, I sentence you as follows. Count 1, the attempted murder of Donato Awule. Category B2, as you took the sword to the scene, which leads to a starting point of 28 years. I reduce that to take account of the mitigation to a sentence of 25 years imprisonment. Count 3, the attempted murder of Yasmin Metchan-Whitfield. Category 1A to reflect both her serious and lasting injuries and the fact she was a serving police officer. That leads to a starting point of 35 years, which I reduce to the sentence I impose of 31 years. Category 4, aggravated burglary, Category B1. That leads to a starting point of 8 years, which I reduce to a sentence of 7 years. Count 5, the attempted murder of Cindy Arias. Category B3, which leads to a starting point of 20 years, but the attack was in her own home in front of her child. So I increase the figure before mitigation to 24 years, which I reduce to the sentence I pass of 21 years for the mitigation. Count 6, the wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm of Henry de los Rios Polania. Category A3, which leads to a starting point of 5 years, but here again the attack in his own home in front of the child, which increases that figure before mitigation to 8 years, so the sentence I pass is reduced to 7 years for the mitigation. Count 7, the wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm of Malloy Campbell. Culpability A, harm between Category 2 and Category 3. This would lead to a sentence of about 6 years, but this crime has the profound aggravation of being an attack upon a serving police officer. So I would increase that sentence to 9 years before reducing it for mitigation to one of 8 years imprisonment. Counts 8 and 9, possession of 2 swords, Category A1, which leads to a starting point of 18 months, which I reduce to 16 months for the mitigation, then by a quarter for the guilty pleas to a sentence of 12 months for each of Count 8 and Count 9. Count 10, possession of a bladed article in a public place. Culpability A, as it is a bladed article, but I do not think you had it there as a weapon, but as part of your psychotic, half-planned later consumption of your cat. So I take harm Category 2. This leads to a starting point of 6 months, which I reduce to 5 months imprisonment because of the mitigation. The life sentence I must impose for the murder of Daniel Anjorin will also have a minimum term that you must serve before the parole board can consider whether it's safe to release you on licence. They may decide that time will never come in your case. Nonetheless, I have to consider and impose that minimum term. In my view, the proper approach in your case is to first take the term I would impose were I only dealing with the murder of Daniel. In that case, I would take the starting point in Schedule 21 for a murder when a weapon has been taken to the scene of the crime of 25 years, then increase that term to 30 years because the victim in this case was a child. The two issues I have had to grapple with are how much should I increase the minimum term to address the other offending, and how much should I then reduce that term to reflect the mitigation of previous good character and, above all, your psychotic state on the day. I have asked myself what minimum term would I have imposed on someone who had committed all these offences when they were in their right mind. The sort of figure I would have arrived at to reflect 3 attempted murders and 2 woundings with intent with 2 police officer victims would lead to a term of perhaps 50 years, though in fact I would probably instead have regard to paragraph 8 of the schedule and conclude the mass of aggravation of the other offences would lead to a whole life order. On the basis that a person who had committed all the dreadful offences of the 30th of April last year would attract a minimum term of the order of 50 years, I reduce the term I impose on you by a 5th to recognise your mental ill health and previous good character to 40 years. From that, I have to deduct the number of days already served. Therefore, the sentence I pass for count 2, the murder of Daniel Anjorin, is life imprisonment with a minimum term of 38 years and 309 days. Mr. Monzo can go now. Thank you, gentlemen.
So, to clarify, for the murder of 14-year-old Daniel Anjorin, 37-year-old Marcus Monzo was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 40 years. Taking into account the time he spent on remand, this works out to be 38 years and 309 days from the date of sentence, Friday the 27th of June 2025. This means he will be eligible to apply for parole from Thursday the 1st of May 2064, when he'll be 76 years old. If Monzo survives this long, I doubt he'll ever be released. He is far too dangerous to be back in the world again. I want to play a clip of Daniel's mother and father outside court, showing a huge amount of bravery and dignity, reading out a statement where they thank those who supported them through the horrific year since they lost their boy.
This has been a painful and deeply traumatic chapter in our lives. No verdict or sentence can bring back our son Daniel, who we loved so dearly, but we are grateful that justice has been served. Daniel was taken from us in a way that no family should ever have to endure. His life had so much potential ahead. He was gifted academically, was kind, and had a generous spirit that touched everyone who knew him. We carry that light with us, even in this dark time. We want to express our deepest thanks to the police, prosecution team, and all those who worked tirelessly to seek the truth. Your dedication has meant more than words can fully convey. To everyone who supported us through this ordeal, friends, family, our church, our workplaces, our children's schools, and even strangers, thank you. Your love and support has been a lifeline. We honour Daniel's memory, not in the shadow of this tragedy, but through the love and happiness that he brought to us and all those who knew him. Thank you.
The road where Daniel Anjorin died became a focus of the grief of the community, and flowers were laid in memory of this young man who was taken far too soon in such tragic circumstances. A week after his murder, a candlelit vigil was held in the car park at Hainault train station, with over 300 people in attendance, including those who knew Daniel, but also complete strangers who just wanted to be there to support a grieving family and show them that the community was there for them. A fundraising page was set up to enable Daniel's family to move away from the area to start over somewhere new, without them having to step out of their door every day and see the spot where their loved one was murdered. In total, over £160,000 was raised. I sincerely hope Ebenezer, Grace, and Daniel's siblings have been able to move away and are somewhere safe and beginning to rebuild their lives, being supported by those around them. I have nothing but respect for these two people. I've said it again and again on this channel, but I have such admiration for people who have been through the worst horrors and still keep going, and even go so far as to thank others when their hearts are completely broken. On Saturday the 4th of May 2024, Arsenal FC, the team that Daniel supported, paid tribute to him during their game against Bournemouth, with a round of applause resonating around the ground during the 14th minute, banners being displayed in memory of a child whose future had been cruelly snatched away from him. Daniel Anjorin was laid to rest on Friday the 17th of May 2024, with his funeral being held at Jubilee Church in Ilford. His family, friends and teachers were amongst the more than 100 people who turned up to say goodbye to him, to pay their respects to someone who should have been safe, simply walking to school. Daniel, you would have done so much in this world. I'm so sorry what happened to you. I hope you're safe, at peace, and I have no doubt one day you'll be reunited with those whose lives you lit up simply by your presence. Until then, rest easy, bro. This is an extremely complex case to analyse. As I said before in previous videos, understanding the actions of people who are psychotic is extremely difficult. Often their rationale is utterly bizarre and makes sense only to them in that moment. But when this has passed, even they cannot really explain things. With regards to Marcus Monzo, he claims to not be able to remember anything, so the likelihood of him ever giving any sort of explanation for his rampage is, in my opinion, little to none. However, we can look at the evidence and speculate. As a starting point, we need to strip this case right back. We need to look at who this man fundamentally is, separate from his mental health issues. This leads me to headlines about this case and others recently, where they go, "How did this lovely person turn into such a monster, etc." It irritates me, because for these people, they usually, and have always been, arseholes in some way, shape or form. This has just been missed or ignored until something brings this to the surface. Let's take Marcus Monzo. There are indicators that he was disliked by others because he was an arrogant and narcissistic man. He was someone who liked to look down on people, someone who wanted to present himself as a guru, who had developed a god complex. In addition, look at how he acted after the crimes. As I said earlier, if I'd lost touch with reality and during that time killed a child, I would be inconsolable. And if I'd been told this had been triggered by cannabis use, then I would never touch drugs again. But Monzo sat completely impassively during his trial and was getting high in prison. The man simply did not care. I think this was something that was always part of his makeup, his lack of empathy, his lack of consideration for anyone else. I think that Marcus Monzo was fundamentally a sad, unimportant man who had no real conscience or empathy for other people, who wanted desperately to be relevant. He wanted to be some sort of spiritual or maybe even a cult leader, with people fawning over him. Even his ramblings about conspiracy theories fits into this. Conspiracy theorists are often extremely arrogant people. They present themselves as experts on multiple topics and often talk down to anyone who challenges them. However, like other killers, he also fantasized about use of violence to achieve power, about being a ninja or a Jedi. He also clearly liked movies depicting violence, gleefully telling the hospital staff at Broadmoor about a slasher film he'd watched and comparing his crime spree to the Hunger Games. Due to his drug use and his underlying schizotypal personality disorder, Marcus Monzo disappeared into a world of fantasy and conspiracy. The more conspiracy theories he subscribed to, the more he posted online, telling everyone else the quote-unquote truth. He was all-knowing. He knew everything. His narcissism, his belief in his own superiority increased, and I've no doubt his fantasies about violence also became more pronounced, with him imagining himself as a ninja, wielding his sword. As already outlined, I don't believe for a second that this one incident was the first time that Marcus Monzo was psychotic and violent, but it appears nothing had previously been reported. And so we come to the spree itself. I think this was the culmination of everything, and due to his psychosis, Marcus Monzo was totally disinhibited. He could act on all of his delusions of grandeur. So I think a really important clue about why this incident happened was the fact that Monzo told police that one of his alternative personalities was an assassin. This is how he saw himself in that moment. He was finally the ninja, the samurai, the one with ultimate power, who was killing people with purpose for a specific reason. He saw himself as some sort of executioner, meting out punishment, but punishment for what? I believe that him repeating over and over again about whether anyone believed in God holds the answer. This was clearly a question he was posing, and there was obviously a right answer, but what was it? Was he asking if anyone believed in God because he wanted to kill the non-believers? Was he asking because he found the idea of worshipping a deity offensive and would end the lives of those who identified themselves as religious? Given that it's reported that Monzo was raised Catholic and involved in the church as a child, and apparently convinced himself of a pending Armageddon, I'm leaning towards the former theory. Maybe it isn't coincidence that in the book of Revelation, before the main battle of Armageddon, there are a series of catastrophic events and wars where the enemies of God are destroyed. So maybe Marcus Monzo saw himself as the one tasked with killing the enemies of God before the end of days. Such a lofty mission would match how he saw himself, as a superior being, an angel of death. But this is just speculation. I think I'm on the right track, but maybe we'll never know. what led to 20 minutes of terror on the morning of Tuesday the 30th of April 2024 on the quiet streets of Hainault. But I think that Marcus Monzo is fundamentally a narcissist with no empathy or remorse. His drug use and his mental health issues just magnified this to a truly terrifying degree. He's clearly far too dangerous to ever be released. So what are your thoughts on this case? If you like the content, then consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button. You can also send a one-off donation to support the channel via the thanks button. Please like, share and subscribe. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.